In the fragile stillness that followed Eric's worsening condition, an unease began to settle inside Ridge that he could neither dismiss nor immediately justify. At first, it was only a fleeting observation. Brooke, standing at Eric's hospital bedside, seemed composed, too composed. Her hands were steady, her voice measured, her eyes clear. Grief manifests differently in everyone, Ridge knew that. Yet he had loved Brooke long enough to recognize the rhythms of her emotion. When she feared losing someone she cherished, she unraveled. She trembled. She clung. Now she stood with an almost calculated serenity. The contrast unsettled him. While the rest of the family oscillated between panic and despair, Brooke's calmness bordered on detachment. The suspicion did not erupt overnight. It simmered. Ridge told himself that he was projecting, that exhaustion and stress were distorting his perceptions. But each passing day sharpened the feeling. He noticed how Brooke stepped away from the hospital corridor to take private calls. He observed how her reassurances to him lacked the spontaneous warmth he once relied upon. The old intimacy, the silent exchange of shared dread, felt absent. Instead, there was distance wrapped in politeness. And the more he watched, the more that distance transformed in his mind into secrecy. Driven by instinct rather than evidence, Ridge made a decision he once would have considered unthinkable. He hired a private investigator. The act itself was an admission that trust had eroded. He justified it as precaution, as protection of his father's legacy. If Brooke had nothing to hide, he reasoned, the investigation would prove it. But beneath that logic lay something more personal. He feared not merely betrayal of business interests but betrayal of love. The detective operated quietly, shadowing Brooke's movements with professional discretion. What he uncovered was not immediate scandal but patterns. Brooke meeting Bill in secluded corners of upscale restaurants. Brooke entering Bill's office after hours. Conversations conducted in hushed tones. Photographs captured from across the street, grainy but unmistakable. Audio recordings, though fragmented, carried enough context to ignite alarm. Bill's voice discussing timing, Brooke's voice referencing opportunity. Words like leverage, consolidation, and transition drifted through the static. When the detective presented the findings, Ridge felt the ground beneath him tilt. The images alone were troubling. But it was the suggestion of strategic language, corporate terminology intertwined with personal secrecy, that pierced deepest. Brooke and Bill had a history saturated with volatility. To see them aligned in private meetings during Eric's illness felt like more than coincidence. Unable to contain the dread building inside him, Ridge arrived unannounced at the detective's office one evening, demanding to see everything firsthand. The investigator hesitated but ultimately complied, spreading documents across the desk like pieces of a sinister mosaic. Among them lay a draft agreement, unsigned but unmistakably collaborative. It outlined potential restructuring scenarios that would merge influence between Forrester Creations and Spencer Publications. The language was cold, precise. It proposed gradual shifts in controlling interest under the guise of stabilizing leadership during Eric's decline. Ridge read each clause slowly, his face draining of color. The plan suggested that if Eric's health failed and Ridge became preoccupied with internal conflict, a strategic alliance could consolidate authority. Brooke's name appeared alongside Bill's in preliminary notes, suggesting her role as intermediary within the Forrester board. The implications were devastating. This was not a casual conversation. It was blueprint. Pain struck him first, sharp and disorienting. Then anger followed, simmering and volcanic. Brooke had stood beside him in hospital corridors, offering comfort, while simultaneously exploring pathways to redirect the empire his father built. He felt foolish for ever questioning his instinct. The calmness he observed was not resilience, it was calculation. When Ridge confronted Brooke, he did not ease into the accusation. He laid the photographs and documents before her with trembling restraint. The office where they had once shared whispered reconciliations now felt hostile. He demanded explanation, not only of the meetings but of the intent behind them. Brooke attempted to speak, but the evidence silenced the softer tones of denial. She insisted that the discussions were precautionary, that she sought to shield Forrester from instability if Eric's condition deteriorated. She framed the alliance as strategic defense rather than coup. Yet the recordings contradicted her nuance. The phrasing captured by the detective revealed ambition beyond mere safeguarding. Bill's voice carried satisfaction. Brooke's responses did not rebuke him. They aligned. Ridge's heart fractured further with each recollection. He realized that while he agonized over Eric's fragility, Brooke and Bill had explored contingency plans that positioned themselves at the center of power. Bill entered the scene at the height of this confrontation, his expression unapologetic. There was no attempt to feign innocence. Instead, he regarded Ridge with a smirk that radiated superiority. He spoke of inevitability, of evolution within corporate dynasties. He implied that Forrester Creations needed adaptive leadership, not sentimental attachment. Bill reveled in the discomfort his presence caused. He described the alliance with Brooke as visionary, as pragmatic, as necessary. Ridge's fury ignited fully then. It was not only the business maneuver that wounded him, it was the intimate betrayal. Brooke had known the weight of Eric's condition. She had witnessed Ridge's vulnerability. And still, she entertained strategy with the man who had once been his fiercest adversary. In that moment, the romantic mythology of Ridge and Brooke shattered. Destiny no longer felt poetic, it felt manipulated. Brooke's defenses faltered as she realized the depth of Ridge's pain. She insisted that she never intended to undermine him personally. She argued that Eric's potential decline required proactive planning. But the nuance was lost in the shadow of secrecy. Had she approached Ridge transparently, perhaps the conversation would have unfolded differently. Instead, she chose covert collaboration. That choice eclipsed her rationale. Ridge declared that whatever destiny once bound them had dissolved. His voice did not rise, it hardened. He could endure rivalry, even heartbreak, but duplicity intertwined with family crisis was unforgivable. He walked away from her not in dramatic flourish but in exhausted finality. The door closed with quiet decisiveness. Brooke remained standing amid the scattered documents, her composure finally fracturing. The alliance she believed strategic now appeared monstrous in the light of Ridge's anguish. Bill lingered only briefly before departing, satisfied that his influence had widened the fissure irreparably. Alone, Brooke confronted the magnitude of her miscalculation. She had convinced herself that foresight equaled loyalty. Instead, her secrecy transformed foresight into betrayal. As night enveloped the office, the empire she sought to protect felt farther from her than ever. And somewhere in the city, Ridge drove without destination, grappling with the collapse of a love he once believed unbreakable. Ridge did not drive home that night. He drove without destination, the city lights streaking past his windshield like blurred memories he could not quite outrun. Every image of Brooke in the detective's file replayed in his mind with merciless clarity. The secrecy, the meetings, the strategic language that reduced his father's illness to leverage. What wounded him most was not the ambition itself but the timing. Eric lay in a hospital bed fighting for strength, and Brooke had chosen that fragile moment to explore power consolidation with Bill. Ridge had always known Brooke possessed ambition. He had even admired it once. But ambition that operated in shadow felt like betrayal. By the time he returned to the Forrester mansion, exhaustion had settled into something colder. Taylor was there, sitting quietly in the living room, waiting for updates on Eric. When she saw Ridge's expression, she understood that something more than corporate conflict had occurred. He did not speak immediately. He poured a drink he did not taste, then finally revealed what he had discovered. The alliance. The documents. The recordings. Taylor listened without interruption, her own emotions complicated. Part of her felt a surge of vindication, another part felt sorrow. She had spent years navigating the gravity of Brooke's presence in Ridge's life. To see that presence fracture under the weight of secrecy was tragic. Even if it created space for her. Meanwhile, Brooke remained in the office long after Ridge left. The documents lay before her like evidence in a trial she had not realized she was staging. She replayed her reasoning in painful detail. Eric's condition had frightened her. She had seen how vulnerable Forrester Creations could become if leadership faltered. Bill, ever opportunistic, had offered strategic reinforcement. She convinced herself that aligning temporarily with him would protect the company from hostile takeovers. She had not intended to undermine Ridge. But intention no longer mattered. Perception had eclipsed nuance. Bill, for his part, saw the confrontation as inevitable. He had never doubted that Ridge would eventually uncover the alliance. In truth, he may have counted on it. Bill thrived in disruption. Watching Ridge's composure fracture under revelation satisfied a rivalry that had simmered for decades. Yet even he recognized that Brooke's devastation was genuine. She had believed she was safeguarding the empire, not detonating her own relationship. The following morning, the Forrester board convened under tense circumstances. Rumors of corporate maneuvering had begun circulating internally. Ridge arrived early, composed but distant. Brooke entered shortly after, aware that every gaze lingered longer than usual. The room felt divided before discussion even began. Ridge did not publicly accuse her. Instead, he announced that any external negotiations involving company control would henceforth require unanimous board transparency. The message was clear without naming names. Brooke felt the isolation settle around her like a fog. Outside the boardroom, whispers intensified. Employees sensed a shift in power dynamics. Steffi and Thomas observed their father closely. noting the restrained anger beneath his professionalism. When they learned of Brooke's alliance with Bill, their loyalty hardened. They had always been protective of their father and their grandfather's legacy. The idea that Brooke entertained consolidation with Spencer Publications during Eric's illness struck them as calculated opportunism. At the hospital, Eric showed subtle signs of improvement. His eyes fluttered open intermittently, though his strength remained fragile. When Ridge visited, he masked his turmoil with reassurance. He did not burden his father with corporate drama. Yet inside, he grappled with a deeper fear. That Brooke's choices had been driven not merely by strategy, but by a fundamental misalignment of values. If she could prioritize leverage over loyalty during crisis, what did that reveal about their foundation? Brooke, determined not to surrender entirely, sought a final conversation with Ridge. She approached him not with defensiveness but with vulnerability. She explained the fear that had driven her. She admitted that she should have included him in every discussion. She acknowledged that secrecy had been her greatest mistake. Ridge listened, but the hurt remained raw. Trust, once fractured by suspicion and then confirmed by evidence, does not mend through explanation alone. Bill entered the scene again, this time less triumphant and more contemplative. He recognized that the alliance had achieved partial success but at enormous personal cost for Brooke. He reminded her that power requires resilience. Yet for Brooke, power now felt hollow. The victory Bill envisioned, strategic influence over two empires, had come at the expense of the one relationship she valued above all. Ridge made his position unmistakable. He would not contest Brooke's ambition, but he would not share a life built on clandestine negotiations either. He reaffirmed that their bond, once defined as destiny, could not survive duplicity intertwined with family crisis. His departure from the conversation carried finality. He did not shout. He did not accuse further. He simply stepped away, choosing integrity over reconciliation. Left alone, Brooke confronted a silence heavier than any argument. The empire she sought to protect now felt inaccessible. The man she loved had chosen distance. Bill's presence lingered as both ally and reminder of miscalculation. In seeking to secure Forrester's future, she had destabilized her own. As night settled over Los Angeles, the city's skyline mirrored the fractured landscape of alliances below. Ridge stood on the balcony of the mansion, staring into the darkness, aware that love and power rarely coexist without sacrifice. Brooke remained in her office, lights dimmed, contemplating whether ambition without transparency had always been her flaw. And somewhere between corporate strategy and emotional ruin, the future of Forrester Creations hovered uncertainly, suspended between legacy and